It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Katrin Faridani. Katrin has worked for the last 25 years as a photographer and an educator in Canada, South Korea, and Bulgaria. She has visited over 30 countries and does not intend to stop. She shares her home with her husband and their 4 dogs. She hopes to photograph all 5,000 plus water treatment plants across Canada. Good for you. Katrin has a Master's of Fine Arts in Documentary Media from the Toronto Metropolitan University. Please give Katrin a warm shout out.
Thank you. The clicker. Okay. Of course, I forgot my notes, so I have to read from my little screen here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Katrin Faridani. I'm here to talk about my Master's of Fine Arts project, which I worked on from, yes, closer up. Okay. So I worked on this project from the fall of 2021 at Toronto Metropolitan University, which was formerly Ryerson University, in the documentary media program. I completed my installation in the summer of 2023 when it was exhibited at the Image Center Gallery. And you might wonder why I said installation, because a photographic exhibition on its own is just that, just photographs, but this included elements of video and sound, so therefore it's in an installation. All right, let's see if this works. Yeah. Not working. The big buttons, right? Well, I guess you can do it for me. All right, so moving on to the next slide. I will tell you the images that are in the slides because I don't repeat the images. So this particular one is Ashbridges Bay treatment plant, which is one of the sites I photographed. So interconnected is a visual exploration of the Toronto wastewater system. It documents the path of water from my home or our home to the lake and back, and it shows the connection between wastewater and our drinking water here in Toronto. So why did I decide to work on this topic? You asked me this just a few minutes ago. So we can move on to slide 3. Let's go back a little ways. My family is part of the Armenian diaspora that migrated to Iran in the 17th century. So my ancestors, I should say, not my family in particular. So in the 1970s, when I was a child there, I experienced something that not many people did, besides the revolution, that is. You see, the city itself at the time was around 4.8 million people, the city of Tehran. And according, these numbers are, of course, according to Census Online. And at the time, most of Tehran had no sewer system. So you might find that kind of an incredible fact, but most houses were on septic tanks, many of which were actually built underneath the houses, which in hindsight is not a very safe option. On the other hand, rainwater was basically traveling through gutters along the streets. So what would happen was a lot of times cars would end up in those gutters. People would end up in those gutters. I myself fell head first and suffered my first concussion, first of many, in one of these gutters. But because Tehran was built on the side of a mountain and the more affluent people lived in the mountain, like along the side of the mountain, garbage, debris, pollution would literally flow down to the south end of the city. And this was obviously not very sanitary. And on top of that, gutters not sorry, the septic tanks were problematic because they had limited space. Sometimes they would not drain properly. If you have any experience with septic tanks, you know that there are certain things you cannot put in them. Not everybody was aware of all of the intricacies of how to deal with septic tanks. And so they would block, they would fill up. And of course, the buried rivers in Tehran would also wash away some of them, which is what happened to our property. So I remember the building that my father's studio was housed in. He was also a photographer. The septic tank collapsed and there was a gaping hole in the middle of what would have been the living room. And this took about 3 weeks to repair, during which time all the units in the house were not able to use water and toilets, which is impossible to live with, as you can imagine. So my fascination with water infrastructure started with this incident. And then in 2001, I went back for a 6-month visit. My dad and I photographed the country together. And the septic tank, which had been relocated to the garden, collapsed again. So I experienced this lovely incident twice in my lifetime. And this is pictures of the garden where they dug a new one. They used that earth to fill in the old one. And a lot of the workers were migrant workers from Afghanistan doing this delightful work. All right, let's move on to the next. So my mom passed away in 2020 of dementia. In her honor, I wanted to go back and do an MFA. And Toronto was her favorite city. Water was one of the resources that she was very sort of pleased with in Canada, because in a lot of countries you can't drink the water, and in a lot of places, even in Canada, we have water boil advisories. We'll talk a bit about that later. So I decided to do a project in Toronto because it was the tail end of the pandemic. Travel was still quite complicated with lockdown restrictions and quarantines and so on. And so I decided to do a project on Toronto. In combination, we moved to a new home in North York, and let's just say our water smelled funky. So we were a little worried. We called City of Toronto. They tested the water. They educated us about what was causing the odor. And can you take a guess at what might have been causing the odor? Nope, not a bad guess, because that does happen. It was actually, you know how in schools we were taught not to put cooking oil down the sink? It was the cooking oil down the sink, which was trapping food. And every time we would turn on the water, the gas would release odors. So here I've got just a small selection of the images. I did some aerial photography. I'll talk about that later. So that's the bottom photo. That's the turbine room on the top left at RC Harris. It's probably one of my favorite rooms that I photographed, but it's really loud in there. And then the other, again, is Ashbridges Bay. So that incident with Toronto Water sort of took me down that rabbit hole. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. I don't know why I'm reading my notes. I know other things. In the meantime, work was being done in our neighborhood. So this was completely a coincidence. We had the stormwater pipes being replaced. So streets were being dug up and the pipes were being replaced. This is just around the corner from my house. And there were workmen doing this work, but the system was still operational, which was very interesting to me, because how do you dig up your roads and replace the pipes, but the system is still working? So again, this intrigued me. And the next slide is also some of the work being done in that area. So this took about 16 months, and it is moving down from our neighborhood. It's continuing further. So, and we are at Victoria Park. We're at the northeast end of North York. So we're at Victoria Park in the area. And that whole area is being done. All right. Move on. So, part of what we learned at Ryerson PMU was research methods. And research creation was one of the methods we were taught about. I thought that this would be the best method for me because essentially what research creation is that you don't know what your final project will look like because the research that you do in the topic dictates what you will document. So you don't go and decide this is what I'm going to photograph. No, you do the research first and then you decide what elements to document. So basically, I started my highly scientific research method of going on social media and asking people if they knew anybody in Toronto Water. Whether they knew anyone who was working with lakes and rivers, and the connections blew up. So I know hundreds of people in this city from the various jobs that I've done. This lady, Christina, was one of my clients, and she put me in touch with someone who used to work Toronto Water, but no longer worked there. So she didn't have those restrictions that somebody still working in Toronto Water might feel they have. She urged me to look at runoff because according to her, that was the area of that was most problematic. The infrastructure wasn't there. It wasn't really supporting the population numbers in Toronto. And basically, what was the issue was that part of Toronto is on a combined sewer system. Does anyone know what that is? So yes, so what is a combined sewer system?
Storm sewers and sanitary sewers, that rainwater sewers. And when you flush the toilet sewers, travel along the same tunnel, but separate with distance.
Sometimes separate, sometimes combined, like sometimes they go exactly into the same pipe, yes. So along the south end of the city where settlement first happened and along Yonge Street, up to about St. Clair is a combined sewer system. The rest of Toronto, including where I live, is a separated sewer system. So that's one of the problems, that the separated systems flush into the combined. And it cannot handle the traffic, quite literally. And the other problem is we are changing permeable land to impermeable land. So we're changing grass into roads. We're changing farmland into roads, and it's just spreading further and further north. And like Tehran, Toronto's on a slight incline. So everything that comes down to the lake has to come through the city and through that combined sewer system. So it just could not handle the volume. So that was what she explained to me and said that this is really what you need to look at because everyone who works in this sector of Toronto Water wants to talk about it. So it's great, let's do that. So we can move on to the next slide. This is basically what I was just talking about. So in a perfect scenario, that little bump that you see on the right side would stop that water from going into the lake. But when the volume of water is very, very heavy, it needs to go somewhere. Because if it didn't go that way, it would come back up through people's homes. And so we have experienced since the 80s quite a heavy combined sewer overflow incidents. And if you remember in the 80s, you couldn't swim in the lake. Part of that was this, part of this, that was the automotive industry that was polluting both in Oshawa and in Hamilton, polluting Lake Ontario. So the Joint Commission basically had the automotive industry clean up what they were doing, but this is a bigger problem because all of that land south of the Danforth is so heavily built up that they cannot separate the systems. It's actually impossible to do this work and highly costly. So on to the next slide. Along with my research on the Toronto water systems, I also started to research other photographers who had done similar work. So Michael Cook was a Toronto resident who is now living in Australia, I believe. And he illegally entered a lot of these stormwater and sewer pipes at night, from what I've read, and lit them up and took these beautiful photographs. I think they're beautiful, but you know, that's just me. And he covered quite a lot of both Toronto and Niagara region, from what I've read. He had representation, so there were people who wanted to hang this work up in their houses. And he did get in trouble. I think he was charged for entering the system, but because there was nothing malicious in what he was doing, charges were dropped. So his work really inspired me, and I used to, I basically said, this is what I want to do. I want to go into the top. And yeah, that was one of my things. I also went to,
Yeah, this is address that issue about access to this. How did you get it?
it's coming up.
Okay. Continue.
So I also researched the Toronto Archives, and I'm happy to say that my project is now also part of the Toronto Archives. They took 40 of the slides. And I call it slides, files, sorry. Arthur Goss was the first official photographer for the city of Toronto. So at the turn of the century, he photographed the Bloor Viaduct being built. And if you've ever read In the Skin of the Lion by Michael Ondaatje, he is mentioned in that. He photographed the Island Water Treatment Plant, which is what you see here. And I read quite a bit about the work at the Island Water Treatment Plant. It was mostly manual labor, and the intake pipe is from the center of the lake. It's like over 5 kilometers out. So you can imagine what it took for these people at that time to put this down. Now that pipe might have been extended. It might have not been 5 kilometers to begin with. I don't know that detail, but still, even 2 kilometers would have been a huge undertaking for the systems that were in place at the time. So yes, my aim was to be Goss 2.0 and be the second City of Toronto photographer, but it's coming, hopefully. All right, we can move on to the next slide. That's the previous story. All right. So I did a bit of research to see what my neighborhood looked like, because I needed to put my own story in this project. So I looked up my neighborhood in 1934, and as you can see, we've got Victoria Park Avenue and Woodbine Avenue, which is now John Mills, and it was all farmland. And this isn't even 100 years ago. And then that's what it looks like from my Google Maps today. So all of that permeable land has now become impermeable, which of course affects running. All right. So in talking to my professor, my advisor for my project, he said, you need to personalize this project. You need to look at how it affects you. And you can't take a bite that's too big, because you have 2 years to do this project. You can't photograph all of Toronto. Because of course I wanted to do all of GTA, which is over, I think, seven or 8 treatment plants. And in addition, he said, I've looked at your Instagram and your architectural work is quite strong. So have you considered actually photographing the water treatment plants? Because in my mind, I was just going to do the tunnels. And I was going to enter them illegally, like Michael Cook, not considering that he was half my age when he did that. So I then started to consider what the path looked like. And through another contact of mine, I got access to Toronto Water, and the woman who was the project manager for Toronto Water sat me down at her computer and she mapped out the runoff from my house exactly. So I put that in my book actually, but basically the water goes, like, a lot of the rivers in Toronto are buried, but some come up and join the Don or the Humber. So my rainwater water actually does end up in the Don. So I documented that 24-kilometer route from my house to Ashbridges Bay. And this is part of it. And this projection really doesn't do justice to the images, but yeah. So on Duncan Mill Road, you can't see it very well in this picture, but there's a grate at the back of that wall behind the trees that basically dumps all the rainwater. And then it basically goes to Ashbridges Bay through a bridge. The other thing that the woman at the Toronto Water was able to do for me was to give me access into the tunnels. Because I tried to enter one myself. And I had a very sobering realization that I'm too old and too out of shape to do this illegally. And so I had to go through legal means. So going on to the next slide. I was able to enter the Coxwell bypass tunnel. If you drove across the Bloor Viaduct in the last 2.5 years, you would have seen just north of the Bloor Bridge a crane, which is now gone. There used to be a soccer field there. They put one of the shafts for the Coxwell bypass tunnel along just on that site, and that's where all the equipment was taken in and out. So the shaft itself was almost 22 meters wide. The tunnel is 6.5 meters wide and 23 kilometers long. And it is built to hold rainwater during heavy rainfall or during thaws of 600,000 cubic meters of water. So that holds the rainwater, reduces the stress off the combined system, and slowly releases the water to Ashbridges Bay. And in Ashbridges Bay, the water is purified and returned to the lake. So when I did finally, the lovely ladies, the woman in the middle, she was the one who took me in. I had to go back online and float because everybody told me I couldn't do it. So we can move on to the next slide. So I did end up thinking that I need to give people an idea of scale and position for these projects, because that previous picture of a tunnel doesn't really tell people much. But giving aerial shots, I hired a drone operator who helped me photograph. I have since purchased a drone so I can do the West End. But I just wanted to give people an idea of the scale of these things. So we took advantage of fall colors and we went out fall of 2022 and we did a couple of sites in one day. And it was both video and photography, because I wanted, the video shows the entire space. So we flew the drone over the Bloor Viaduct so people could see the bridge and could relate to where it was and how big it was. All right, next. So Ashbridges Bay water treatment plant is where all that water terminates. And of all the people that I was connected to through my social media research and also professors at TMU were really very giving. I was even hired as a research assistant for the Water Policy Cafe, and I still work with them because Carolyn Johns, who's the head of the Water Policy Cafe, wants to take this project, create a video for policy makers, because she says people are making financial decisions about water budgets, and they don't even know the full cycle. So she helped me, and another professor at University of Toronto helped me. I happened to write to her one night just to touch base. She emailed me immediately and said, I'm taking my biochemistry class to Ashbridges Bay tomorrow. Do you want to come along? So sometimes you just get lucky. And I went with them. And because it was a full class of biochemistry students, I sat there and they gave us a 45-minute basically information section on how the system operates, history on the plant. And I had been recording all of these site visits because I couldn't take notes while I was photographing. So I had hours and hours of audio, which I had to transcribe, and I used YouTube to transcribe it for me. It wasn't perfect, but it was free. So I turned my MP3s into MP4s, loaded them into YouTube, and it just basically spits out a transcription for you. So, in this meeting, I learned so much from David, who's the manager of the treatment plant. That's the indoor, pool and, or tank as they call it, and this is one of the outdoor ones. So what happens, we can actually move on to the next slide for a bit. So the main tank is the size of 6 Olympic size swimming pools. It is a biological treatment plant, so, the same bacteria that's in our gut is what is breaking down the waste in these pools. And yes, this is sewage, but it's 0.2% sewage. The rest is your kitchen water, your showers, your laundry, and runoff, which is also treated. So you can't see it very well here, but maybe in the next slide, you can see that there's some scum on the top of the water. So this is actually all the grease and oils from our kitchens, which we're really not supposed to be putting down there. And I've stopped doing it. I now clean everything with paper towels, put it in compost, and then wash my pots and pans. But this hydraulic arm has attachments at the bottom, so the oils are collected from the surface and processed below in tanks that we will see later. And the bottom is scraped by basically attachments of this arm that scrape the heavier solids from the bottom. So the same arm sort of processes both top and bottom. And the smell in this is highly chemically, I know that's not a word, because it's mixed with chemicals as it's coming into the tank. And I was just happy I was wearing a face mask because of COVID. So we can move on to the next slide. There's also solids like branches, money, rings. I had an email from a woman who saw the Blogio article that you saw, and wrote to me and said, I lost my grandmother's rings. I had them in a tissue and they fell in the toilet. And I saw your article. So she wrote to me and I wrote to David and I said, someone's lost rings. What can be done? And David basically said, we have 2 53-foot solid waste extraction, like tank. These get washed and dried, by the way, before they go into the landfill. But basically it was like needle in a haystack. There's no way of finding them. And then she wrote me back a few days later and said, oh, I found the tissue somewhere else. I haven't lost the rings after all. So that was lucky for her. All right, so that was the solids. Anything larger than 6 millimeters gets pulled by these big rollers before the water goes into. All right, we can move forward. So basically, these three mason jars. The center one is what the water looks like when all the solids are removed. The twigs and leaves and whatnot, before being processed. The jar on the left is the water that comes out after the processing, after the filtration happens. And I asked David during this meeting, I said, would you drink that water? And he said, absolutely. But it's very highly fluorinated. So they don't return the water fluorinated to the lake, because that's going to upset the natural sort of balance of the lake. So the water sits in outdoor tanks and is naturally fluorinated by UV light, and then it is returned to the lake. So the only thing that this system cannot remove is salt, the road salt that we use so heavily in the lake. And that's a whole other topic that I'm working on right now. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. So basically that terminated, that was the end of the water flowing to the lake. And then we have water being extracted from the lake for our consumption. So the island water treatment plant is on Ward Island. It is the first one that was built, which is what was photographed by our photographs over 100 years ago now. And the intake pipes are 5.3 kilometers by Lake Ontario. And if you don't know what that looks like, Neil, the manager of the island treatment plant, took a cross section of the pipe and put it so that you could see the CN Tower through it. I think it makes for a pretty photograph, right? But also it's 10 times the height of the CN Tower. So he put that together for people to understand the connection of the length of the intake pipes. So one of the reasons why they intake from so far away is because they want to be further away from where Ashbridges is dumping, right? I don't want to use the word dumping. That's not the right word. So the water from Ashbridges is entering close to shore. They want to take the water from the middle of the lake. So it's clean. All right, let's move on. This is some of the infrastructure below the tank at the treatment plant and the turbine room. I quite like this cryptic, so I thought I would include it, but we can move on to the next. And this is the main tank at the water plant, at the island water plant. So one of the things that happened with Neil at the island water treatment plant was that he gave me a 4-hour tour. He was clearly very proud of the work that they were doing and wanted to explain every bit of it to me, which of course I recorded. So I have a 4-hour audio file. After transcribing that, for my exhibition, I took excerpts from those audio files for the labels of the images that I had in the exhibition, because I wanted the information to be accurate, as well as in the book. So once I sort of figured out which pictures matched with what captions, I sent it back to the managers for fact checking and corrections if necessary, and that is what I had up at my exhibition. But the water that comes in is 3 degrees, and the water that we use out of our cold tap is 13 degrees. Does anyone know how it warms up? Didn't think so. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Has anyone heard of a company called Enwave? They're down by the Rogers Center, so you can see that building. So the John Street pumping station is just underneath the Enwave building there. And they take the lake water and they run it through these pipes. They don't touch the water itself. They use the temperature from the pipes and harness that cooling, and they cool the buildings in the downtown core of Toronto. And not only does that generate income for the city of Toronto, but it warms up the water for us at no cost. And it's also saving energy for Enwave because they're taking the natural cool temperature of the water and using that instead of having to cool those buildings through other means. So that system is called the Deep Lake Water Cooling, and it's being expanded. And it's also, they're looking at the reverse. They're looking at taking the water from Ashbridges Bay, which is much warmer, using that energy to heat those buildings. So that's something they're working on. Okay, on. And last but not least is RC Harris Water Treatment Plant. The landmark of Toronto, one of the landmarks. Yes, they do, yes. They use both, to be honest. So the water treatment plant is at the base of Victoria. It used to be called the Victoria Pumping Station. It is 2 buildings. I photographed both. Unlike the island water treatment plant, the manager of RC Harris sort of left me to do my thing. Like, here's the tanks. Go photograph. So I actually ended up photographing this as my first location, which is ironic because it's at the end of the cycle. But I photographed it multiple times. And one of the reasons why I went back was because I found out that they do backwashing to clean the tanks. So if we go on to the next image, This is the first shot I took for my project. That is the last shot I took for my project. And there's a print of that over there, like, looks much better. But I wanted the sound of water gallery. Once I knew I had the image center gallery, I wanted the sound of water, and I knew I would have access to video. TV screen, so I could include a video element. So I went back and I was able to video record the backwashing process, which is done during the daytime at RC Harris because they have over 20 tanks. But at the island treatment plant, it's only done at night when there's less demand for water. So they drain one of the tanks during the day for just me to video record. So I'm one of 3 people in Toronto who has seen the island water treatment plant tanks being backwashed, but the RC Harris ones get done during the day because they have 20 tanks, so there's much more flexibility for them. So I did that, and basically 1/3 of the drinking water that we use in Toronto comes from RC Harris, and it serves all of the not just the East End, and 20% comes from the island water plant. So as demand got higher and higher, they started building more. And I think this might be my second to last slide, I'm not sure. Yeah. So this is what the cross section of the filtration looks like. It is being updated. It might not be this anymore. But at the time I was photographing it, it starts with gravel on top and the pipes are at the bottom. It is a very slow and quiet process. There's no sound of water whatsoever. And it's very common to be in these fields. If anyone has gone to Doors Open, you might have been able to enter RC Harris. I don't know if they let you actually go into the tank room, but it was cool and it was quiet. It was just lovely.
You can go into that central walkway.
They let you during Doors Open go there?
Yes, they do.
Nice.
It's like an atrium. I mean, the place is upstairs.
It is. What's even more beautiful is the holding tanks below, but I couldn't go into them because they're full of water. But Arthur Goss photographed those before they were in use. So you see these big sort of columns in a row. It's just photographically delicious, but I couldn't access them.
The building.
Yeah. So the pipes, part of them are bringing water in, part of them are taking water out. Just long hauling the pipes. And I wasn't able to enter all the parts of RC Harris like I did with the island because I was not being poured. So Neil really took his time looking at the island water. All right, and some detail shots of the plant. This is part of the turbine room. These two photos. That's the main sort of clock and control power in the main building. And yeah, I could have photographed this building. All right, I think that's it. No, it's not. One more. Yeah, these are some of the aerial shots I did. And those are some pictures I pulled off from the internet of RC Harris being used for various film shoots. Apparently it's a really popular place. So I don't know what movies those are. I think the bottom one is a TV series. But yes, it's very popular film. So part of what I did with this project was to look at solutions. Because runoff is something that we're all responsible for. Now, I think the new mayor is looking at possibly taxing very large properties for their runoff. It's not going to affect us in regular sized homes. But I did look at solutions, and one of the things that's very cheap and easy to do is rain barrels. Because first of all, it's not good for you to use tap water for your garden because of the chlorinated nature of that water. It would be better for you to use rainwater. Rain gardens are not that difficult to build, and actually the city of Hamilton and Dundas has financial incentives for homeowners to build rain gardens on their properties. Not sure why Toronto doesn't have it. Toronto has it for large businesses. There's actually a bylaw that they have to have a green roof if they're over, I think, 5,000 square meters. So that is in place, but nothing for residential property.
Can you define a rain garden?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, repeat the question. Please hold on.
so I was asked to explain what a rain garden is. Happily, I will do so. I went to Dundas one day and I photographed Michael and I did like a time lapse video of how it's done for him. But he has a book out on how to do it, and I referenced the book in my catalog, which is up there. But basically what you do is, say you have a downspout, and your water is just draining off from there. You form the land in such a way that that water remains there for it to have time to be absorbed. So you plant native plants, because native plants have deeper roots. They're not as susceptible to parasites because they're native to our environment. And they will use the water, and the longer, let's say you buy a car, the best day of a car is that first day. With a rain garden, that's the worst day, because the older it gets, the better it functions. Those plants root, the ground starts to work the way it's supposed to, the older it gets. So the idea of a rain garden is that the water doesn't run off your property, it gets absorbed in groundwater. Because as water gets absorbed in groundwater, there's a natural filtration that happens there. So you want to do that as much as possible. And of course, urban gardening, this is the TMU urban garden. There's 2 roof gardens at TMU. And if your budget allows, there's lots of options for permeable driveways. And a lot of them are made of recycled material. So this is another aspect that I researched because I was interested. And I wanted to present that. So there's a whole section in the book about it. So there's ways we can work to reduce our own impact. Everything requires effort and some costs, some more than others.
Do you know if the city of Toronto still provides green barrels? I have one in my backyard and
I don't know.
the city provided.
I have not read that they do. When did you get yours?
Oh, 25 years ago.
Yeah, I have not read them. And I did a bit of research on this because when I found out about Dundas, it was like, why doesn't Toronto do this? I could be wrong. I could have just not seen it because I didn't search specifically for rain barrels. But yeah, it would be good if they did.
Okay.
All right, and I think that's it. I keep saying that and there's more. Because I forgot my notes today. That's the second last slide, right?
That's the last thing.
Okay.
Oh, no, there's one.
Yeah, there's one more. Did you have a question?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on rotating bacterial contactors? RBC units?
I actually have just read about those. Are those the ones that go in the ground?
It can be above ground, it's just a series of mesh on a wheel. On wheels, and
Yeah.
they dip into the sewage. And they go back up into the air, then to grow the bacteria.
Okay, that I haven't read
Reduce
about.
the bugs.
I will read about them now.
You know, right now, I have a trailer in a trailer park. And the sewage system has been deemed inadequate for modern times. So so they're asking them to do more sewage treatment before it goes into
The septic tank?
the septic
Yeah.
tanks. So they've been forced to look into other means of sewage, one of which is an IBC.
So that's a very specific use
Yeah, I should have
Yeah.
brought some of the information from 10 years ago that I haven't.
Yeah. Well, one of the,
Around.
thanks for reminding me of this, actually. One of the things that I found out when I was at the City of Toronto Archives was that there was all kinds of research done about runoff in the seventies. And there was an organization in the beaches that put out a pamphlet that had all the solutions that we are now using. And this was 40 years ago. So it's shocking to me that we know all this and it takes us basically getting to a point of no return to put them into place. And that's just a statement on it.
You have a question for Paul online, go ahead, Paul. Unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very well done. The pictures were great. I'd like to make a few clarifications if I may.
Sure.
Isn't the solid that at Ashbridges Bay, I thought that was burned rather than taken to the transfer station.
No, actually, they, because of this woman who lost her rings and then found them again. I recently touched base with, David, at Ashbridges, and he stated in the email that 2 of those truckloads are taken to the dump. And, when I was there for my tour, they had also mentioned that the solid, so, you know, the human waste, the dog waste, whatever it is that's being dealt with in the plant is purchased now by a fertilizer company.
Yes.
So it is used to grow not human food, but hay for animals.
Farm, yeah.
Yeah.
The reason the water is so cold, if I may suggest, is that the city did a test and there is a low area in Lake Ontario where the water is extremely cool. And that's where that pipe from the island filtration plant goes to. So it's not just that the lake is cold, it's that specific area. That 5-kilometer pipe was fairly recent in terms of the history of the city of Toronto. And that was put together and it was actually floated and was a navigational hazard off the island for quite a while before they sunk it.
Yeah, I'm
And-
sure they tell me those things when I go for a tour. They only want to tell me it's working right.
And then the water cooling of the downtown core seems to be working very, very well. They also originally the Steam Whistle Brewery used that water when it came right out of John Street for cooling the beer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that's one of the driving factors for doing that system. It was Steam Whistle Brewery wanted to use it for cooling. Their plant is now up on Evans Avenue, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I was there the day that that system was initiated, and I was the one that started it.
Nice.
Are there other brands, other intake plants around long branch and Port Credit?
Yeah, so I only documented the east end because I was told to limit my project due to the
So
2 years.
there are-
So the west end I have not touched. There's a treatment plant in Pickering that serves Pickering like that.
The one in the west end, the pipes go straight out from the bottom of Kipling Street out. I would not say that they're any more than 2 kilometers out, but they are right there. And that is far enough away from the Humber treatment plant that it doesn't impact it. I
Yeah,
ran the Clark and I also ran the Harris for periods of time in my life.
Oh, I didn't know that. So you must know Gord.
No, it was very interesting. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, Gord is the most enthusiastic human being I've
Oh,
ever
Gord,
met.
yeah, I know Gord, sure. He's a very nice guy.
Like, yeah, I have contacted the city of Toronto to do the West End, but now I'm not a student. I'm considered a commercial photographer. So they have completely stopped my access. And I've spoken to various organizations, including Swim Drink Fish. and they have suggested to me, and I don't know if this is true, that maybe the health of the Humber doesn't equal the health of the Don. And maybe that's why they're not keen to give me access, but I don't know. So I'm gonna be working with sort of more grassroots organizations on the west end of this project.
Okay, so we have a question from George. Online. Go ahead, George. Introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. I found this very, very interesting. I will use my paper towels to soak up the the fats in my frying pan before it goes down the drain. I have had some setbacks in helping out in this system in that I live in a 180 unit condominium with a rooftop garden. And the original plan had no water taps on the roof. So I managed to get a rain barrel and find a runoff that would keep the barrel full. And people used that for maybe 5 or 6 years. It was high enough off the floor that they could put a pail under the spout and take the water to the garden. But they said that was too difficult, and they paid to have a tap put so that now they're feeding the garden with chlorinated water. Similarly, the gardeners in our building decided that our garden on the roof wasn't big enough, so we took over a block of boulevard on Mill Street and got approval to plant it. And again, it didn't have any water, so I buy barrels that olives come in, and I've had quite a lot of them over the years. But I've got a system in the old mill paper fiber building where I got up to a drain that was open and directed it into my tanks with a flexible hose. And that was again used to water the garden until Infrastructure Ontario said I couldn't have access to the building and put their screen fence to prevent us from accessing the water. So it works against us. On the other hand, my daughter has a very small front yard in a semi-detached house in Little Italy, and to get the rainwater and the sump pump not emptying onto the street, I have dug what are called French drains, 3 or 4 of them, about 18 inches in diameter and 3 feet deep, filled them with gravel, and then had a little river running from her downspout to them, and the water is absorbed in those French drains before it gets to the sidewalk.
It's really great that you're doing these things, and I'm sorry that you're hitting roadblocks. It's unfortunate that the city has different priorities. One of the things that I learned working with Michael in Dundas was how little it takes to create a rain garden. Basically, you need time and you need to know how to form the land to hold the water. So yeah, it's not rocket science. You just need to use logic, and we all know water moves in weird ways, so you just have to control the path of water.
Do we have David online?
And we have Bill back there. I think let me just take the mic back to him.
The next time any of us are in Paris, I strongly suggest you try and get on the sewer cruise. We were there a number of years ago, and this was quite good. There's been another couple who's supposed to go out of there.
They had scoped out this boat side. And on our way there, I happened to know, I think it's another hill that we go from. And it's the sewer tree. Notes that that was one of the things I wanted to do in Paris. As we said, what do 3 high-priced water and an assistant deputy minister showed their children on the first day in Paris. We went through the sewer. Paris is built on a swamp on an island in the middle of a river. So you can imagine as the river goes up and down, you have to adjust the level of the sewers so you actually get a flow that will cause the sewers to exit. If you have a street map of Paris, you can find your ways in any address in Paris in the sewers. Because the sewers have the name of the street above them in tile on the wall. And as the entrances up and smaller and smaller, they're down that house level. They're coming in. And the sewer tour is run by retired employees. All the exhibits, of course, because the water level has fluctuated, are suspended from the ceiling. And the day we were there, it happened to be open. And of course, one of the other reasons when you have a sewer, because Paris, where you get effectively a combined sewer, and it's not at all smelly. It is gray, but it's not at all smelly. Is all the dust silt comes in and builds up in the sewer. How they get rid of the silt is they have an enormous ball that you put in at the top of the system and it rolls through the channel. And it creates enough turbulence. Silt is picked up, carried down again. It's an absolutely fascinating experience. You're in Paris and get the chance. You can add home to it. But first choice, if it's open to the sewer, it's open on a very, very regular basis.
Wow, one of my lives in sewers is, in movies, actually.
Well, you follow up on that. It's a comment because we took our case through. When we took Robert C. Ray Mill on the scene where John O'John was going through the sewer, he was done only with lightning, no doctor. Robert was into it 2 seconds. He knew what the sewer was doing.
Wow, thank you for that. Really take it there. And we have Seamus online now.
Yeah, so let's go ahead, unmute yourself.
Good day, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry I was a bit late. I had to, I don't understand it, but it worked out. I had to reload the Zoom system for some reason. It was an update in it. But anyways, it worked out. I found this to be a fascinating presentation. And many, many years ago, I studied fine arts at York University, specifically printmaking, which include the silver process, which was black and white photography in ordinary language. And I was very interested in the environment at the time. But what I noticed was, and this, your project brought back a lot of good memories and frustrating memories, because a lot of us I include myself in this, take our water system for granted. It's absolutely essential. And what I'm trying to get at is the aspect of industrial pollution. I notice I live in a condo development with 500 apartments. And we talk a lot about, you know, not putting grease down the pipes and all that. And I didn't know about using paper towels, thank you. And I usually put it down the toilet. But then I realized if I put the grease down the toilet, there's a combined system, so it defeats the purpose. So I'm going to join George and I'm going to buy extra paper towels. But what I'm getting at is the, forgive me for going on, the industry also is a huge polluter. And you did mention that, and thank you. The automobile industry had a lot of pollution. And I used to do a lot of fishing out in Lake Ontario, and I remember being told by fishing boat operators that, and this was years ago, that a lot of the pollution sort of gathers at the bottom of the lake, industrial pollution. Can you speak to that, please?
Well, as I like to call myself, I'm a water enthusiast, I'm not a water expert. I am still learning a lot about what is happening in the lake, and one of the reasons why I talked about salinization of the lake, like the fact that Ashbridges Bay doesn't remove salt is because that's a project that I'm working on for a publication. So I don't know everything that happens in the lake. I don't pretend to be an expert. I focused on this system because it was of interest to me, and really because I wanted to prove to myself that I could bring tap water despite the odor. But I do know there's a lot accumulating in the lake from various sources, salt being one of them, that is affecting the biodiversity and the life in the lake. I don't know very much about that yet, so I can't comment on what's sinking to the bottom, but yeah, it's something that I will probably explore later on.
George, you want to stand up?
Yes, that reminds me that Georgian Bay and Lake Huron have had zebra mussels, but now they have a new kind of mussel that is a deep water mussel. And apparently there are quadrillions of them to the point that every cubic meter of water in Lake Huron goes through a mussel every day. And it's destroying all the food stuff for other fish and plants that are native to Lake Huron. And I wondered if that situation is also occurring in Lake Ontario.
Yes, there's zebra mussels in Lake Ontario, big time. And actually, they were plugging the intake pipes. They were building up to such a point that they were plugging the intake pipes. So now there's a constant stream. They built something around the pipe that is constantly pushing water out so that the zebra mussels can't attach. Well,
These new ones are much more prolific than zebra mussels. I would also comment that I have a cottage in Georgian Bay, and it's at the mouth of the Musquash River, where a lumber mill was established and ran for half a century, so that the water in that area is full of tannin, and we have no zebra mussels.
What last question from Shayna's online?
Okay, that's it.
No, I'm not online. Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, no, I was just adjusting myself on my furniture here. Let's put it to you this way, and I apologize for the inconvenience. Thank you, Graham. First of all, Katrin, I compliment you on your research. I'm very impressed with it. I wished I had that emphasis that you had on creative research many years ago. I'm over 40 years ago, because your focus is so clear, and thank you for your enthusiasm. I will just add one story. I grew up on a farm in Ireland, and it was a dairy farm, and our house was a large house, but the sewage system broke down, and we had our own septic tank and so forth. And it was around the time of my summer holidays, and my father was constantly concerned about keeping me away from devilish temptations. And he had me build a new system for our domestic sewage from the house. And that was my first experience of how important not alone our water system, but our sewage system and how it impressed me. And we were on a dairy farm, how essential it all was for public health. Yes, I did have some help from some other farmers, but it was a very interesting project, and I never forgot it until today. You're brought back memories of what's how important our environment is, and that we become more aware of the need for understanding all these things connected with water. Thank you.
That's right, so, Katrin. I have to stop and think about how to say it, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You have fascinated all of us
Thank you.
and clarified a lot of things as well. I'd like to offer you a little token of our appreciation. That is where we pride.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And let's give Katrin a wonderful shout out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katrin. And upcoming next week, we have, we are filming again. This club is being used for other things next week. And we're doing, we're going back to the history of the Great Mary Rose. This is a documentary on the sinking of it. And someone who's done some research into the skeletons on the Mary Rose. And he's a diver and trying to come up with some reasons for why this happened. And then the following week, we have Vinny and Carol Dawson, and they're going to share more adventures they've had on their PML Princess line. So with that, we have outside. And bon appetit.